There is a famous case of chemist Auguste Kekule dreaming about a snake forming a ring by holding its tail in its mouth. This provided insight into the structure known as the benzene ring in organic chemistry. Science writer Mike Sutton explained that the ability of Kekule to hold complicated visual images in his mind was extremely helpful to his understanding of molecular structures. My bottom-up thinking works a little like the elimination game 20 questions that I played as a child. I'll use it, for instance, when I'm asked about the prognosis for an autistic child without speech. The kind of general question I am often asked by parents at conferences. In order to help them, I need specific information. Using the process of elimination enables me to determine the best options for them. I respond by asking a series of questions to narrow down the possibilities. In this case, the possible causes for the child's lack of speech. I often struggle with verbal metaphors, but my mind is like a visual metaphor making machine. Sometimes people ask me if visual thinking is like having X-ray vision. It's not. Visual thinking is the ability to see associated images from your visual memory files and access them in different ways to problem solve, navigate, and interpret the world. That's why object thinkers are often designers, builders, architects, mechanics, and artists. In some ways, I could say that visual thinking saved my life. I first wrote about my aunt's ranch 25 years ago in Thinking in Pictures. Even then, I didn't fully understand how my teenage fixation on cows, certainly a byproduct of my autism, led to my work as a designer and animal behavior professor. When I turned 40, I realized I was able to think about things more clearly, compared with when I was 20. When I looked back at my old diaries from the 1970s, I was astonished at how jumbled my thought patterns were. I was making a lot of associations that did not make much sense. This was owing to huge gaps in my visual database. The larger my database grew, the more connections I could make. It's like an open-ended accordion file. As I've grown older and had more experiences, I can solve problems much more easily because my memory contains more visual data. My world has gotten bigger and bigger. Navigating visually often means finding visual metaphors to explain novel situations, and I still use them. When I recall these kinds of details, many people ask me, how can you remember that? To check myself, I did a Google search and saw that I had remembered correctly. Embroidery thread is made of 3 strands. If I had not been able to see the threads in my imagination, I would not have been able to recall the correct number of threads. I can even feel and see the needle poking the underside of the fabric, making a tiny tent before it pierces the fabric to complete the stitch. I love tracing patterns, measuring fabric, cutting it accurately, and sewing it together. Later, I would apply these skills toward putting together livestock handling systems, connecting some of the skills I still use today back to those sewing classes. Same for the cooking classes. They were process-oriented, teaching us how to measure and add ingredients in order. Measuring liquids is the same whether it's a cup of milk or a 3.8 gallon dip vat. I also participated in the drama program, opting for the behind-the-scenes jobs I excelled in. I travel a lot, and wherever I go, I see almost no one reading books or magazines. Parents and teens are on their phones. Kids are playing video games. I'm hardly the first person to take note of this, but from my vantage point, the addiction is directly connected to a larger failure, the loss of trained workers in this country, the loss of people who are good at working with their hands and who are likely visual thinkers. Most students never have the chance to learn what they might be good at. Restoring shop, art, music, and home economics to schooling would help. Another great way to expose kids to different ideas and potential careers is through field trips. When I was growing up, field trips were a big deal. I was in elementary school when I first visited a car factory. I can still vividly recall watching an air wrench screw in all 5 bolts on a wheel at once. I'd seen my dad laboriously change a tire by removing and replacing it one lug at a time. I remember being fascinated by the lug wrench, jack, and lever. Intimations that my mechanical mind was already at work. I could have stared at it for hours. The machine that achieved at warp speed what had taken my father ages. The budding, clever engineer in me was on fire. Making mathematics mandatory, writes Hacker, prevents us from discovering and developing young talent. In the interest of maintaining rigor, we're actually depleting our pool of brain power. He didn't advocate dropping things like basic or quantitative skills, and I don't either. As a visual thinker who has worked with a wide range of engineers, software developers, welders, CEOs, and other professionals, I understand that math is important, but there are different kinds of math, and different kinds of learners, and different kinds of real-world applications. The issue is what will help students down the road in their careers.